Pinkerton's Ghosts is a horror anthology podcast by Superversive Radio, with no affiliation with any detective agency, person, real or imagined, or the dark forces of Outre Terre. It is not intended for children.
When I sat down with Titania in the entrance hall of the McCarthy house, I was not sure what to expect. Making contracts with the Fae was not a skill that my mother had felt the need to teach me. If interactions with the Fae ever came up in my case files, the pattern was always the same. The Fae would offer a contract, and the agent would refuse regardless of who or what was being put at stake. The reason was simple. No matter what terms, what was being offered, what promises were given, and they never lie, the deal is never what you think it is. That's just a surface angle. Then, as the deal is unfolding, others will suffer, more than you ever could. I did not understand that. So what is it you want? For someone who was apparently so in need of a paranormal Pinkerton's help that he resorted to kidnapping, she was taking her time to explain the issue. Titania made a point of walking over to the armchair at the other side of the table, propping her chin on her hand as she rested her elbow on the armrest. Finally, she sighed, blowing a vine entwined into her hair out of her eyes. "It's my marriage," she said. For a moment, I stared. "Your marriage?" I repeated. "Surely you can't be serious. You couldn't have kidnapped a marriage counselor if that's your issue?" Titania laughed. The sound rang out in the house like ominous wind chimes. "Funny, but I already know what the problem is, and it isn't something a therapist or bonbons could solve." She leaned in closer. "Tell me, you're a smart girl. Or rather, you're an idiot, but an academic one," she clarified. "You must be familiar with Shakespeare." "Of course I am," I said. "Then you recognize my name, surely." "Of course. A Midsummer Night's—" I stopped. My brow furrowed, and I leaned back in my seat, crossing my arms. "You're not telling me that actually happened. Well, is it more plausible that of all the names in the world for his fairy queen, he happens to choose mine? He was a remarkably perceptive mortal, the most of any without Irish blood that I've come across." She waved a hand dismissively. "There may be a bit of artistic license involved. It isn't simple. A name change here or there, timelines condensed and whatnot. But more or less. But I'm not telling you this to look back fondly on screwing with the emotions of some overly hormonal teenagers. I enjoyed Shakespeare as much as the next well-read person, but it was not as if I had read through it yesterday. Still, anyone with even passing familiarity with the playwright would have the basic plot beats in mind, and in my head I shuffled through them like a deck of cards. "So you're angry because your husband made you fall in love with a donkey?" Titania's eye twitched. "You annoying little—" "The child, mortal! I mean the child!" Of course I knew it was the child. Maybe it was a little petty of me, but I wanted to get under her skin. Just a little. "Oh, I see," I answered, lifting one leg to rest on my thigh. "I remember now. You'd captured a baby and wanted to raise it, but Oberon wanted to make him into a servant. And then he made you fall in love with the donkey." Titania narrowed her eyes, but she did not respond to my baiting. "That child was stolen from me," she said. "I want him back. He was mine." My brow furrowed. "Hold on. The same child?" "Of course the same child. He would be over 300 years old." Titania waved a hand dismissively. "Do you think I care about something as insignificant as time?" "Kind of ironic, for you of all people to decry the injustice of kidnapping one's child," I answered. "Cheeky," But I'll have you know I never begrudged the many foolish young mothers that make the perilous journey into my realm. As of yet, none of them have returned with their child at all, but I do understand why they try. Then why do you need us? I asked. Why not get the baby yourself? You know where he is? It's your husband. Surely it can't be that difficult. Titania rolled her eyes. Unfortunately, contracts between Fae are as binding for us as it is for you. Our marriage is a contract. I can't hurt or steal from him, but he could do it to you. If you recall, he used Puck, the little whelp, but as you can imagine, it's difficult to employ one of my servants without it getting back to him. I sighed. I pressed my hands together, almost in prayer, pressing them against my mouth as I considered it. When I took too long, Titania continued. I know it may not seem so, but I love my husband well enough, she said. All couples go through these marital spats. But being immortal, ours just lasts a few centuries longer than most. So, what will it be? I lowered my hands from my face. If I understand this correctly, I said, you want me to go into your realm, the Fae realm, and find the baby that you stole, which Oberon stole from you. If I return it, I will receive the living bodies of Killian and Shannon McCarthy. Oh, you don't need to find him, Titania said. Shannon will be with the baby, I'm certain of that. And the baby will be in the homestead of Oberon. You can even take her yourself. As for Killian, I've no idea what Oberon has done with him. But, well, a contract is a contract, and I'll make good on it. He'll be delivered to you. Alive. Alive isn't good enough. I knew how dangerous a position I was in. If I was going to do this, make a contract with Titania, I had to be meticulous. Every word needed to be picked apart. How do I know you won't return him in a coma, or near death? Fae have healing magic, I'm certain of it. If Killian is alive, I want him back in the condition he was 48 hours ago. Oh, you have to be kidding me. You must admit he's not innocent. Nor his children, I might add. They killed more of my subjects in a week than most mortals have been able to do since the invention of gunpowder. You kidnapped his daughter, punctured his lung, and almost caused his son to lose a leg. At least they learned their lesson. Titania seemed to consider this. And, I added, if she was telling the truth, Shannon never approved of what they were doing. She never shot any of your satyrs. She's innocent. She lured them in. But I suppose it's true that she didn't kill any herself, she mused. And I can swallow a modicum of pride if it means regaining it tenfold after what was done to me. She tapped a finger against her lips. I can accept those terms. I also need a way to guarantee that I can make them leave with me, I continued. Your deal may include returning them, but it says nothing about them being able to leave your realm. Just handing them to my possession isn't enough. To answer this, Titania stood. She knelt down near my mother. I tensed, ready to jump up and intervene. But she didn't touch her. Only her bag. She tossed me the bottle of pills. If they've had any of our food or drink, then give them one pill. It will allow them to leave without any negative repercussions. It's that easy. It's not as if I keep iron in my realm. Do you think it grows on trees? Take one for Killian, one for the girl. I don't want you using it for anything else. I pour them into my hand. 3, I retorted. 1 just in case. Fine. Then there's one more matter to discuss. I pocketed the nearly empty pill bottle. Yes? I need you to put something up as part of the deal. I crossed my arms. What? My soul? No? Although if you're actually willing, I'll take it, Titania answered, smiling wryly. What I mean is, if you find them both before you leave, you'll have no reason to hold up your end of the bargain. So if you fail to give me what I want, what do I get from you? I swallowed. What do you want? Well, if I don't get my baby, it stands to reason I can take another in its place, don't you think? My eyes went toward the front door. Absolutely not, I answered. I'm not letting you have CJ. The child isn't mine to give anyway. I can't imagine a contract being binding when I'm not even the mother of the child. Titania's eyes narrowed. Looking down at the sleeping body of my mother, she nudged it with her foot. Don't touch her, I snapped. There is nothing that I think I will find more immediately spine-chilling than the full-blown excited grin on Titania's face when I said that. Well, it's settled then, she said. You're her daughter. She's incapacitated at the moment. You can speak for her. I get my baby, or I take her instead. The mother loses her child, so the child loses her mother. I hated that she could probably see the worry on my face. I thought I had been doing an okay job of controlling my emotions so far. I wanted to point out that this baby was not even her child. But I held my tongue. It already was not in question what I had to do. No matter what, I was going to have to go rescue Shannon. And logically, Titania, no matter how carefully I worded myself, would always have the upper hand. If she said no, she would be no worse off than she was before. If I said no, then I had to tell Liam that he would be raising his nephew. It was just as she said before. Titania had mastered the first rule of negotiation. She was perfectly capable of walking away. She knew that. I want your terms in writing, and I want time to look them over. Being a paranormal Pinkerton required just as much legal red tape and bureaucracy as it does fighting supernatural creatures, not to mention the amount of times our agents find themselves in misunderstandings with law enforcement. To that end, I was familiar with our lawyer, Mr. DeVay, although only through hearing my mother's side of phone conversations. Finding paper wasn't that difficult. There was an office upstairs with plenty of stationery and pens. And although I did not have his number at the time, I was able to use my mother's cell phone and scroll through her contacts list to find DeVay's number under Southern Fried Lawyer. The good news, according to him. I had managed to produce a contract that was ironclad and meant exactly what it was supposed to. The bad news. I had, in fact, produced a contract that meant exactly what it was supposed to, if it did not end up going in my favor. I hung up the phone. Titania had decided to leave me to the rift while I had consulted with my lawyer. We had been walking through the woods on the property for some time. Once I'd pocketed the phone, I heard her say, "Stop. Here." The ambient noise of a gently running stream greeted me when I focused on where she was pointing. It was a very slight incline. Not large enough to be called a waterfall by any stretch of the imagination, but a drop nonetheless. Her spindly finger was pointing up at the top. "I don't see anything," I said. "Focus." I narrowed my eyes and attempted to. If I tried, I thought I could see something. A slight ripple in the air. Like pavement on a hot summer day. "I see it," I agreed. "At least, I think." For something that caused so many problems, it was rather anticlimactic. Although I'm not sure what I had expected. Ominous music? Some sort of gateway? A blue pool standing upright in a black ring? Good. So no more problems? Any other lawyers you'd like to consult? Perhaps you'd like to run this by your publicist too? Oh, be quiet. I answered. Your terms are fair enough for me. You'll have your kid back. I turned. So now we sign? Sign? Oh. Oh no, that's not nearly binding enough. From the folds of her mossy robe, Titania produced a small knife. She held out her hand, cutting horizontally against the fleshy part of her palm. Now you take it. Hesitantly, I took the knife. A bit dramatic, isn't this? It's a contract with blood on the line, so it will be forged in blood, she answered. I copied what she did. Now shake. There was no going back now. Fairy blood, for anyone interested in documenting this for their own purposes, is blue. I took her hand. I cannot say if the shiver I felt run down my spine was a side effect of the brief contact I had with her blood, or a symptom of my own mind. Okay, the deal is made, I said. Now what? Titania raised an eyebrow. That wide, slightly too many teeth smile came back. Now you watch your step. Before I could ask her what that meant, Titania shoved me. 1 second there was solid ground, and the next, nothing. As far as introductions to the fairy realm went, realizing that the portal on the other end opened out to a cliff face was definitely one of the worst I could have envisioned. Satyrs, with their goat-like hooves, would have had a much easier time scaling the rocky cliff to reach the rift. I, without such advantages, did not have any chance. Ah! I hit the ground and rolled. By the time I finally came to a stop, I took a moment to assess myself. Nothing was broken, thankfully, although I could see the pieces of gravel that had embedded themselves into my palms. Any patch of exposed skin had a scrape to it. I was lucky I had been wearing jeans. Okay, I said to myself. So far, so good. I had not lost the iron. I was, for the most part, in perfectly fine health. I had taken Hawk's gun for my own protection, and that did not look damaged or discharged. And now it was here. Immediately I took in the fact that the world I had entered, on the face of it, did not look that much different from the one I left, except for, perhaps, the shade. The forest canopy was so thick above my head that everything was cast in shade. Other than that, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. No satyrs or fairies wandered about. I started walking. There were lights blinking around me as I moved. Fireflies. I had always enjoyed them. The humidity made my neck start to feel sweaty and uncomfortable. It had been almost winter when I had entered, but now it seemed the Fey realm was stuck in a perpetual summer. If not for the circumstances, I might have been excited. Still fearful, but excited. After all, Titania was not wrong. One of the only advantages we as paranormal Pinkertons have is the supernatural are not of our world, and we are. A home field advantage, if you want to put it that way. Any agent would have been incredibly desperate or insane to put themselves in a position where they would go into their world rather than handling the problem in ours. For that reason, any information we have of the exact machinations of Elfland are speculation at best, or unreliable information from the Fae at worst. Every organization had their secrets about Elfland and never shared them. Even Hawk, one of the few that had been there and lived to tell about it, could only describe it in the hazy recollection of a mind preoccupied with terror and survival. It was without forethought that I darted a hand out to grab one of the small flashing bugs. Not until my fingers closed around it did I realize that they were not fireflies at all. The light slipped through the cracks of my fingers and then reformed into that one singular bright pinprick. I still did not know what to call them. My best guess was that it was the purest, most unadulterated form of raw magic. Among the Fae, it was as abundant a resource as air or oil is to us. Titania had said that Shannon would be with the baby. The baby would be with Oberon in his living quarters. She had been noticeably vague on exactly how I would find those quarters or where they would be. Titania seemed to be at least as sure I would fail as she was that I would succeed, and did not want to do me any favors. After all, even if I failed, she got her revenge on the McCarthys and my mother just to sweeten the deal. Not even 1,000 feet in, and I was already questioning what I had done. How invested, exactly, was Titania in my success? Clearly not that much. I wondered if she was even expecting this to work at all. I shook my head. None of it mattered. My only way forward was to prove her wrong. I struggled with myself. I was making the best decisions I could. Why did they always feel like the wrong choice? I pulled at the collar of my shirt, neck growing sticky with sweat as I trampled my way through the undergrowth of that perpetual twilight forest. My other hand's fingers twitched against the grip of Hawk's pistol. I was a little jumpy. Understandably, I am sure you would agree. And when I heard a rustling from behind me, I had it out in a fraction of a second. Another satyr. An elf. I had not seen one of those yet. And my luck had certainly been bad enough to run into one of those. No. A deer. I blinked. The deer blinked back at me. I breathed out a sigh of relief, even if the way its eyes seemed to glow from catching the dim light was a bit eerie. It had been unclear to me whether or not the Fae realm would have any flora or fauna familiar to me, but so far it seemed so. Before I could do anything else, it leapt and bounded away from me, disappearing into the bushes. I continued on, or at least, I tried to. Navigating densely packed forests was difficult. I had where I entered the realm to use as a landmark since that was a high slope. But other than being away from there, it was hard to tell where I had already been. My hope was to find some sort of river, which I could then use as a path to follow. Where bodies of water were, civilization followed, and the Fae at least loosely followed our same needs for food and drink. Besides, I had no idea how long I would be stuck there. I would try to avoid consuming any Fae food or drink while I was there, but realistically I would only be able to hold out for 3 days at best. With the added humidity and how much I was sweating, more likely less than that. That was what my extra pill of iron was for. I looked at my phone. Just as I thought, no reception. And the time on it had said 9:17 p.m. since I arrived. In the distance, I took note of a sound, like a growl, or perhaps some sort of guttural moan. Whatever it was, it sounded unfortunate. I walked faster. I do not know how I ended up in the same clearing as that animal's grisly fate. Was it simply easy to get lost in? Naturally. Like any thick forest of trees would be. Was it the magic of the placing constantly rearranging itself like a timber labyrinth? Or was it just an entirely different one altogether? The creature was a black bear, rather larger than me. Or it had been. Blood was pooled underneath it, staining the grassy knoll red. Its side had been ripped open, viscera spilling out. But the creature wasn't dead. It was twitching, still groaning in agony but unable to move. Something had its face buried in its stomach. For a moment I wanted to guess it was a centaur of some kind. Somehow a mythical creature made more sense to my brain than what I was seeing. But it was a deer's head that looked up, chewing on intestines like hay. Its head was drenched in blood, and in its antlers, guts and strips of flesh dangled and hung like Christmas tree ornaments. It covered my mouth, The smell of rust lingering in the air combined with the sight before me made me want to vomit. I managed to swallow down my bile and reach for my gun, and a small click caused the deer's head to snap toward me. Its lips pulled back, and I saw they had teeth too sharp to be an herbivore. It was entirely silent. "Get away!" I fired. I missed anything vital. The deer's ear flicked as it was grazed. Pawed at the dirt. I held my ground. It was going to charge me, and I could take another shot when we were both too close to miss. It did charge. I fired 2 shots. Each one sunk into the deer's chest, but either it was tough as hell, or momentum kept it going forward, because it hit me and sent me to the ground. I didn't feel razor-sharp deer teeth tear at me. It was dead by the time I landed, and in the confusion I missed the sound of the arrow that had lodged itself in his neck. I only realized it when my vision stopped being blurry. Huh? My mind immediately went to satyrs. I tried to move, but the deer easily had to be over 150 pounds and entirely dead weight. I heard rustling. My gun had fallen away from me, and I stretched, desperately, to try and get to it. My fingers just barely managed to graze the barrel, and I was able to nudge it just a few centimeters closer. My fingers closed around it, then, and as soon as I felt the shadow fall over me of someone else, I twisted and pointed the pistol. "Wait! Hold on!" He held up his hands. The human held up his hands. "My lord, is that you? McCarthy?" He looked, if not exactly fine, then in far better shape than he had any right to be based off our last meeting. He looked gaunt and emaciated, sure, but he was alive. In his hands, he held a primitive makeshift bow and arrow that looked to be made of a forgiving branch for the bow and milkweed for the bowstring. His face and beard were fully caked in mud. "Hold on. Let me get this thing off of you. You push, I'll lift. Up!" I followed his advice. With me trying to push the carcass off and Killian lifting, I was finally able to gasp a full breath and roll to the side. He whistled. "I think you got the killing blow," he said. "I took the shot a second too late. You handled yourself there." "Thank you," I answered. He held his hand out to help me to my feet. I took it. "You should be dead." "And you shouldn't be here at all," Killian answered. "We can swap stories in a moment. Right now, I've got to butcher this." "Butcher it? This is all good meat. You're telling me I should just let all this go to waste?" "But if you eat it..." I stopped. I had not fully taken in the length of Killian's beard now. Had he not been clean-shaven when we had met? Or at least very closely shaved? How long had they both been here? When I had first moved to Africa, things weren't going too well. Killian, being an experienced outdoorsman, did not take long to butcher the bear and the deer. He started a fire when he was finished, cooking pieces of big game and venison. In spite of how warm it was, I sat close. He started telling me his story while munching on what looked like a piece of homemade jerky he'd pulled out of his bag while the meat roasted. "Couldn't catch much at all," he continued. "Kept losing in the competitions. I was engaged to another woman before I met their mother, you know that? She left me. Too much time away with not much to show for it." "I'm sure you're a very admirable underdog, Mr. McCarthy, but how does that explain how you survived losing a lung?" "First of all, I didn't lose it. Nasty scar, though. Second, well, I ended up in a little village one day around Malwai. Managed to bag myself a gazelle and thought I'd see if they'd give me a little money for it. While I'm there, this old woman approaches me. She's the shaman of the village, she says. Asked me to hunt the lion. Killed her husband, she says, and ate a few other men." He took a bite of his jerky and chewed. Satyr meat is very gamey, for the record, he remarked. I hunted that lion for 3 days. 3 days I tracked that monster. And you want to know something? The bastard almost killed me, too. Couldn't tell you how many shots I emptied into it, and it still pounced on me. I had to use my Bowie knife to finish the job. And you knew that was the same lion. I got a good description. Had a white spot on one of its toes you could use to identify it. And if that hadn't worked, I would have been able to tell when I cut open its stomach. Found the remains of him. More importantly, found her husband's wedding jewelry. Killian leaned back, looking up at the tree canopy as he remembered. Look on her face. We'll never forget it. Like there had been this dark cloud over her that was suddenly gone. She asked me if there was anything she could do to repay me. I told her I didn't want any money. I didn't, too. That hunt. Well, she said she could offer me something better. I asked, like what? And she said, anything you want. Now, I didn't believe in any of that spiritual shaman mumbo-jumbo she claimed to be able to traffic with, but if I wasn't going to take her money, and it makes her feel better to give me her blessings, I figured the hell with it. So I asked her if she could make me the greatest hunter that ever lived. For a moment, Killian let the statement linger. His eyes focused on the dancing flames of the fire he had started. He pulled out what looked like a pack of cigarettes. Do you want one? I don't smoke. Yeah. Why not? He grinned. Bad habit, but you need at least one. Easier to manage one useful vice than something impractical, like gambling. I took the offered cigarette and smelled it. It certainly smelled like tobacco. Oh? Useful? Yeah. Hides your scent from animals. Some are sensitive, though. Some villages won't consider you a friendly until you smoke a cigarette or cigar with a big man or chief. The only problem is keeping yourself stocked with the good stuff. Easier than you'd think, though. Obviously. He grabbed a lighter and lit the cigarette. Then I tilted my head and he lit my cigarette for me. It burned, but the nicotine sharpened my mind. When I stopped coughing, it made things, I don't know, smoother after a minute. I wasn't so hungry, for one. But to your point, you think that woman actually used magic on you? I wish I could say I was natural, but I dropped my cigarette twice and burned my fingers near the filter. Not until recently, he answered, his body language decidedly friendlier. But what else am I supposed to think now? It had been nothing but uphill after that. Hell, maybe that's why we got into this mess to begin with. When you've hunted all the rarest animals in the world, what's left for the greatest hunter to hunt? Far-fetched was not the appropriate word for his story. How could it be far-fetched when I was currently sitting, surrounded by magic in the realm of fairies? But it took a moment for me to wrap my head around it all the same. I remembered the deal I made. I wouldn't mention that. Might also explain how you survived, I mused. The greatest hunter in the world isn't so great if he's killed by the very thing he's trying to hunt. No, that arrow hit a lung. There was something more here than Titania's deal. And that's what made me think of that woman, Killian agreed. I'm not stupid. I know I should have been a goner. Hell, I still didn't get out unscathed. I lost a finger to those damn things. His ring middle finger was missing. It looked like it had been off by the knuckle. I stabbed one and managed to start a fire. The first 3 days I was here I could barely move. Survived off its meat and blood. When the thirst got too bad, I crawled my way until I found the river. Healed up from there pretty fast. He shook his head. Sure you don't want any? I could cook the bear instead. It's actually pretty good. gamey but sweeter than venison. Ever try it? It's alright, I answered. If you eat the food here, you can't come back. Killian looked alarmed. I raised my hands. Don't worry. I have something to counteract it, but it's limited, and I'd rather not waste it in case I'm forced to later. I have enough for you, and I trailed off. I realized I had no idea how much Killian knew. Before I could work up my nerve, Killian grabbed me by the wrist. Listen, he said, after they got me. How's my boy? Did he get out all right? And Shannon, what did she think happened to me? Did she have the baby yet? Oh God, he didn't know. Mr. McCarthy, I said, trying my best to sound gentle. I carefully extricated my wrist from his grasp. Liam is fine. Well, he hurt his leg, but he's not in any danger, and he should make a full recovery. He breathed a sigh of relief. Unfortunately, your daughter is in a bit of a situation, I confessed. Killian stared at me. The cigarette tip, his third, glowed as he took in a breath. What do you mean, situation? God, did something go wrong in labor? No, nothing like that at all. Why did I say it as though that wouldn't have likely been the better option? The Fae weren't satisfied with what they already did, so they took her. They took my daughter? I put a finger to my lips. Who knew what might hear us? And if deer preyed on bears in this realm, then who knew? A fire might attract animals to us rather than deter them. Well, and you're here to get her out. I was not sure whether to be concerned that he thought I, a teenage girl, should be involved on this dangerous rescue mission. On the other hand, his intuition had been correct. I'm not sure what you'd expect me to be able to do, but I do want to help. I already have a way to get you and Shannon back unharmed. You just need to help me. First of all, how long have you been here? Killian scratched at his beard. How long? I don't know. I lost track of time. There's no day and night here. It's always twilight. He put out the cigarette. Have you shaved since you got here? No. Usually it takes at least a few months to grow a beard that long then. Shannon came in after you, so she's only been here for a slightly shorter time. With a small grunt of effort, he pressed his hands against his knees and stood up. Do you know where they're keeping her? The fairy that kidnapped your daughter, she was tight-lipped on those details. Truthfully, I think she was hoping I would mess up, and actually succeeding would be just a bonus for her. So she could be anywhere. No, not anywhere, I corrected. She's being kept with a different baby by Oberon. You know, the Fairy King. Say no more, Killian answered. He was smiling in a way, well, I had only seen on detectives. The short-lived ones who were there to slay monsters, and they just got that call. The call. I'll take you to him. I followed Killian and standing up. You know where he is? Look at this. Reaching into his bag, Killian pulled out a sketchbook. He flipped through several pages of drawn wildlife before showing me a map. See this here? I have been documenting every landmark I've found since I got here. I've got the lay of the land. Best way to stay one step ahead of what's chasing me is to know where they're stepping the most. Killian had drawn out a map. A very crude, very sparsely detailed map, but a map all the same. It looked more like a children's drawing of a fantasy world than of any real place. He pointed to the middle, where he had drawn a triangle. There, he asserted. They gather by the lake. I tracked one of them down. Don't look at me like that. He had antlers. When you get out of the forest, it's nothing but fields of grass taller than me. They come and go out of it, like rodents or something. They have a little home carved into the hill. And you can get me there without getting lost? The dangerous smile turned confident, and he nodded. I guarantee it. Okay. But there is still the problem of getting inside. I was starting to feel cautiously optimistic. Killian's recovery, and apparently supernaturally aided skill, made him an out-of-context problem. I was unaware of whether or not Titania knew he had made this deal all that time ago. But even if she was, it would not have mattered. I doubt she would tell Oberon. This, it seemed, was the best advantage I had. The only question was the best way to use him. I was turning into my mother. I thought of him like a resource, like a detective. Rather than struggle to come up with an answer, his immediate reaction was for a smile to spread across his face once again. He was in his element. Oh, don't worry about that, he said. I've got some ideas. One of the other obvious advantages of having a hunter on my side was that Killian was pulled into the Fey realm with all of his clothing, including all of his survival gear. He'd done a remarkable job in the past month of rationing out their use, meaning that there was still a decent amount of supplies we had to work with. He let me have his knife, and he kept my gun. We both agreed that having a silent weapon would be useful. And as he guided me to the location, we went through what else he had. We quickly agreed on what would be most useful. Killian had a flare gun for emergencies. I'll shoot it and cause a commotion outside, he explained. That should cause plenty of distraction for you to slip in and find my daughter. But if I do that, what about you? I asked. You're almost literally putting a neon sign above your head. They already tried to kill me once and they couldn't do it, he answered. Besides, I wouldn't be much of a hunter if I couldn't slip away from people I know are looking for me. Don't worry about me. Just focus on getting Shannon out. And when you do, use this. He tossed me a whistle. I looked at it. To signal that we're outside? Exactly. I'll try and make my way toward you, but if we can't, well, we both remember where the exit is. You hear that? I concentrated. Killian was right. I could hear something. Music. It sounded like a fiddle being accompanied by flutes. More sunlight, though dim, was reaching the forest floor. The trees thinned. Killian pushed past the last bits of bush and undergrowth, and we found ourselves at the top of a gently sloping hill that fell into a valley. It was just as Killian described. There was a lake, so crystal blue it looked artificial, and the grass in the valley was taller than me. The way they had stomped it to make flat ground has given me reason to theorize that the Fae are responsible for crop circles. It seemed Titania and Oberon did not live in some magical castle, but rather their home was more akin to that of a mouse making a nest in the grass. Around it, Fae creatures. Satyrs, yes, they were serving food, but fairies and what looked like elves all sat eating and drinking as they enjoyed the music. The whole scene would have looked downright whimsical, if not for the corpses. My God, what are those? Killian breathed. Those satyrs were trying to take a bite out of me, but I didn't realize it was a staple of their diet. His face had gone pale. I put a hand on his shoulder. I think those are more sacrificial than nutritional, I said. The Fae have connections with the occult, but more to the point, I promise you, Shannon isn't one of those bodies. She has other uses. Killian, still disturbed, rubbed the back of his neck. He shook his head like a wet dog until his composure was regained. He looked at me. You ready? He wasn't smiling, but there was a gleam in his eye. As I can be. All right. I'm going around the other direction. I'll wait a moment, and when you see the flash, you make a run for it. Got it. As I started to move away from him, staying low to the ground so I would stay obscured by the tall grass, I started to second-guess myself. Was this really the best plan? Did I spend enough time on the details? Should we have spent another cigarette sending out a plan B? Or even just rested a moment longer? Did I really have a choice? There was a sound like a firework behind me. I could see the brightness of a flash in my peripheral vision, and that was my cue. The creatures, some I recognized, or at least I believe I did, as elves, and some I could not even begin to try to classify, were not the kind of animalistic intelligence the satyrs were. At the sound of the flare, they spoke to each other in a language I could not understand. It sounded like Latin, but I know just enough to know that it could not have been. Most of them left their tables and general merrymaking to investigate the source of the disturbance. I made my way to the entrance to the dwelling. It might surprise you to know that the lodgings, in spite of the haughtiness of the fairy's queen, looked natural, almost humble. It was no castle, but the entrance was dug into the hillside like a hobbit hole. It was across the feasting ground, which kissed the grass. I scrambled as quickly as I could, and as carefully as I could without disturbing that grass. As fast as I could, I ducked under one of the tables, full to bursting with food, and some of it having spilled onto the ground as the fey creatures had their rowdy fun. I could see only the feet of the blue-tinged skin, and the voice that spoke was still in that strange pseudo-Latin-sounding language. I stayed still. I smelled of human blood, and yet my stomach started to growl. There were the remains of mortals less lucky than I or Killian, yes, but there was other food too, and that had fallen under the table. I had heard of the black spell and the come hither, but seeing it, grapes that looked almost like jewels, apples so fresh and shiny that they seemed fake. My mouth started to water. Was this part of the magic, to make the food here seem this irresistible to mortals? They were shouting at each other. Whoever had left the building, it was clear that he was not happy about what was going on. I heard the name, Oberon. Oberon. I sucked in a breath and held it. I was not taking any chances. Oberon's shouting got louder. I heard a sharp smack as, I imagined, his hand had collided with the face of whatever subject had been unfortunate enough to try to explain what was happening. I heard the sound of running. For a moment, Oberon's feet did not move. Whatever he mumbled under his breath, I could not say for certain, but I imagine it was some sort of swear in whatever language he spoke. Finally, I saw his feet retreat from my field of vision. I did not want to take any chances, so rather than get up, I continued to crawl on the ground toward the entrance. I looked back. I heard a gunshot. Killian was shooting. As much as I wanted to see what the hell was going on, there was no time. Opening the door and slipping inside, I finally got to see what the Fairy King's home looked like. As it turned out, as natural looking as the rest of it, though somehow still managing to be ostentatious. It was clear the home had been built for fairy height, like the shorter Titania, with no real regard for any of their taller subjects, which honestly felt all too fitting. I had to stay bent lest I hit the gilded ceiling. The walls and floor were also covered in blooms and vegetables, my feet carpeted by prairie grass and flowers. With the way the walls were curving in like tunnels, it all felt very claustrophobic, like they could collapse in on me and I would suffocate at any moment. This all presented a problem. While it seemed like everyone had been outside enjoying their feast and getting drunk, there was no guarantee they were all outside. And what if one came down the hallway? There was nowhere to hide. And in this mass of tunnels, how was I supposed to find Shannon? The answer came in the form of a soft sound, like a hum. The rise and fall of its intonation like a lullaby. In the felt-like moss tunnels, it was difficult to pinpoint any particular noise, but I tried my best. As a child, one year, my mother took me to a pumpkin patch that had a maze of hay bales. She had shown me, pressing my tiny hand against the scratchy straw, As long as I followed the wall and did not stray, I would reach the exit no matter what. I kept that advice in my head, pressing my hand against the mossy-covered side of the tunnel as I moved. I tried to pinpoint whether the sound I was hearing had grown louder or softer, if I could even still hear it at all, or if it was my imagination. There was one point as I rounded a corner. The sound completely stopped. I froze. There were 2 directions I could go, and my eyes darted anxiously between them. Now what? Finally, disgusted with myself, I decided to just go right. What else could I do? As I turned and took a step forward, I felt something wrap around my neck and pull me back. I grasped at my neck, pulling at whatever had grabbed me. I couldn't get my fingers under what felt like leather. I was pulled off my feet and fell backwards. My assailant twisted with me, pushing me down. I kicked at the opponent I couldn't see. The garrote loosened for a second as she tried to keep her grip. "Stop!" I choked out, gasping for air. Knees were jammed into my back. The leather strip closed my throat again. Just as I started to see dark spots in my vision, the grip was relaxed. I fell to my knees, gasping for breath. "Oh my God, is that you? What are you doing here?" Shannon looked different too. Her hair and nails were longer, and her eyes were haunted. It looked like she had taken off her own belt to choke me with it. Perhaps most surprising was the fact that she had a child dangling in a sling on her chest. She must have noticed me staring as I tried to breathe. "I'll explain later," she said, helping me to my feet. "Usually there are guards, but when the gunshots started, they ran, and I just decided I was going to make a break for it." "Was that you?" "In the sense that I'm involved, yes," I answered. "Your father is creating a distraction so I could rescue you." For a moment, Shannon could only stare at me in shock. I cleared my throat. "It is a very convoluted story," I admitted. "The point is, your father is... well, we were wrong about him being dead." Shannon pressed her hand against her mouth as tears started to well up in her eyes, but she closed them as she took a deep breath. We should probably go," she choked out. "You're right. We should. I looked back. "Come on. Let's find the exit." "I can help. I've been here long enough," she answered. "I won't get lost. Come on." She led both of us. As she did, I realized that I had to address the elephant in the room. It was obvious that the child she was carrying had to be the one that Titania had sent me for. The baby, Dravidian dark-skinned, with thick black hair that fell in wisps across his eyes, was somehow managing to sleep through all of it. "Shannon. The baby. Oh. Him? I don't know who he belongs to." She put a hand on his head. "All I remember... well, I had made the phone call to my husband, and I was standing in front of the vending machine. I bent down to grab what I paid for, and then I felt a hand on my forehead. I heard someone whisper, 'Sleep.' 'A sleep spell,' I said. 'I'm familiar.' She shivered as she walked. The next thing I remember was waking up here. They locked me in the room with the baby and told me to take care of him." "I suppose that explains why they wanted to wait until you had the baby," I said. "They wanted you as a wet nurse. They don't have the means to make proper food for a human infant." "Is my son okay?" "He's fine. When we get home, you shouldn't have been gone for more than a few minutes after I got here." "Oh, thank God," she breathed. "I can't pretend I understand much of this at all. But I will never be able to thank you enough." That was often the reaction civilians unfortunate enough to get caught up in paranormal Pinkerton activity had. So I merely nodded. Shannon bit her lip, looking back down at the baby. His name is Raj, she said suddenly. I have no idea who they took him from. Do you think the Paranormal Pinkertons could help find his family? My blood ran cold as she glanced back at me hopefully. Unfortunately, I don't think he has family to go back to, I said, keeping it vague. Shannon frowned. Oh, she breathed. That's so sad. Do you think it would be possible for the Paranormal Pinkertons to help my family take him in? I've been caring for him for God knows how long. I've lost track of time. But I'd be happy to give him a home. How could I not anticipate this? That a young mother that had been forced away from her newborn might bond with the child they were given. What was I supposed to say? I'm sorry, we're going to be giving the child back to his original kidnapper. That a life as precious to me as he is to you would die. What choice would my mother make? Well, Mother wasn't here. I swallowed. I think... I'm sure we can work something out when we return. Thank you so much. There was no way to find a solution where everyone could get what they wanted. I had signed the dotted line of Titania's contract. The terms of the agreement were binding and absolute. My mother's life was on the line if I did not sacrifice a child's freedom. And you're free to judge my decision. But to me, my mother was the right choice over a baby I did not know at all, being cared for by a woman I barely knew any better. Stop. I listened to Shannon. Her brow was furrowed, and I could see that her eyes were starting to water. Is something wrong? Do you smell... smoke? I lifted my nose and sniffed the air, and sure enough, she was right. Smoke. Shannon had led me out a different exit than the entrance I had used. This led out to the other side of the lake than Killian and I had come in from. Sure enough, the entire field was up in flames. I covered my mouth with my sleeve and coughed. What the hell? Girls! Through the smoke and fire, I saw the outline of Killian, who looked to be having the absolute time of his life, covered in soot and holding a blue, bloody knife. I couldn't see the gun. He was stripped to the waist and would have a few more scars when he healed up, but he was very much alive. He did not even stop to question the baby Shannon was carrying, before he enveloped both of them in a hug. To her credit, Shannon did not shy away from blood from her father and his prey, and hugged him back. Dad, they said you were dead, Shannon said. As if I'd die before I saw my own... He paused. Grandchild? We'll explain on the way, I interrupted. Right now, let's... I coughed again. Move. What happened? Flare gun. Start moving. I'll cover you. They're a fire hazard, you know, Killian said as we started to run. All the tall, dry grass made the place go up like Burning Man. Worked out in my favor, honestly. These things hate fire. They got more concerned with trying to put it out than they were in the fact I was shooting at them. Now I can say I know what it's like to kill an elf. Oh, I said, that's... great. I suppose it was not actually that bad. I had no problem with burning down a fairy village. Collateral property damage was not mentioned in my contract with Titania at all. At least it was not something important, like a children's hospital. Getting back to the rift turned out to be the easy part, somehow. We had to take the long way. Obviously, I could not climb up the cliff I had fallen from, which necessitated going around and climbing up the side that was not so steep. It gave Shannon and Killian time to catch up with each other, which I suppose was good. He even cried when Shannon told him what she had named his grandson. Or, apparently, one of his grandsons. So they went to all this trouble for you to take care of this little guy, eh? She had handed Raj to him, and Killian bounced the baby in his arms as he walked. For a man who had just enjoyed shanking an elf noble in the ribs, he was remarkably gentle with the child. Oberon talked about using him as a servant when he was old enough, Shannon said. It was awful, knowing that he was stolen from his family like that. She looked at me. Said that he probably doesn't even have a family to return to him anymore. If that's the case, good for CJ to have a brother, Killian mused. If we could keep him with us, I'm on board. He grinned. Far as I'm concerned, this kid is one of us. We all had to get through this insanity together. I stayed silent. Killian looked at me. How are we getting him out of here anyway? He asked. What do you mean? You said that iron was for the three of us, Killian said. You never said anything about bringing the baby. How do you expect to get him out with us? Isn't he still affected by that whole fairy food curse or whatever it's called? Did you eat something? I raised my hands. They were metaphorically tied in that moment. Shannon already treated Raj like her own baby. What mother would ever willingly give up their baby? Don't worry, it'll be fine, I lied. I have enough iron for him, too. Which was not, to be fair, technically a lie. I merely had no intention to use it for him. Killian's head tilted ever so slightly to the side. Oh. That's good, then. I breathed a sigh of relief that was cut short when he added, What exactly did you talk to that kidnapper about, anyway? I stopped walking. I looked at Killian. What do you mean? You mentioned to me that you talked to her. You said you knew Shannon would be with a baby. What exactly did you both talk about? Shannon was starting to look at me suspiciously, too. We were so close to getting back. All I had to do was get them through the portal. We both gambled for it, I told them. I had to give her my mother if I couldn't get you both out. Saying at least some of the truth was better, I thought, than a total lie or obfuscation. And to my credit, it worked. Killian and Shin's faces both softened immediately, and it seemed like any suspicion of me was banished in an instant. Hold on. I stopped. I took a moment to catch my breath. The climb up had been steep, and I pointed. You see that slight ripple? That's the way out. I pulled out the bottle, taking out a pill. I pressed it into Killian's hand. Swallow this before you try and walk through. And Shannon? The kid? We'll make sure it's safe, I told him, and then once the signal is clear, have them come back. This close to a rift, time should be mostly equivalent. The truth was, since I wasn't planning on giving Raj any iron, and there was no way Shannon would leave him there, I figured I would just tell Titania to go back and take him from Shannon. Better to ask for forgiveness than permission, as the saying went. My mother's life was on the line. For that matter, not just hers, but all the paranormal Pinkertons who depended on control. We're not the most glamorous outfit in the supernatural scene, but we do dirty work and we keep people safe. We save lives. Detectives have died, bloodily and painfully, to keep innocents alive. Every control has had to make those calls. I've seen the black files. I know what they mean. If I was to be control, I had to weigh the value of those lives and when to spend them. I had to make good decisions. I needed to start making good decisions. Now. I had complained about it before, not knowing. Not understanding. But my mother was worth more than a literary reference. Right? Killian swallowed the pill. He then stepped through the ripple and was out of sight. He didn't even hesitate. As I was about to follow him through the portal, I was stopped when Shannon grabbed me. Wait! She hugged me, tightly. Thank you. It's Fine, I answered, standing stiffly until she let go. Let's wait until this is completely over for any thanks, right? After all, I doubted she would remain that thankful for very long. We re-entered the mortal realm, not in the forest, but standing in the front entrance of the McCarthy household. Everything else looked more or less the same. The sky was still as dark as when I had left. Hawk and my mother were still asleep on the ground where I had left them, and Titania was sitting cross-legged on the floor, resting her chin in a small and delicate hand. Well, 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 she remarked. I moved the portal here so I wouldn't have to wait outside, but it seems you actually made it back a lot faster than I expected. I didn't even get that bored. Killian's hand went to the bow hung across his back immediately. I put a hand on his arm. It's fine. Is it? Titania stood, narrowing her eyes at him. I hope you've learned your lesson, mortal. Don't go touching my subjects again. As of this moment, hell, I'm retiring, he answered. You win. Never picking up a rifle again. I almost believed him. Titania snorted. She turned to me. And the others? I swallowed. I had done what I needed to do. I had nothing to fear from my mother. Shannon and the child are still on the other side, I said. I made good on my end of the deal. The relief slowly drained away from Killian's face, replaced by confusion. What are you talking about? Mr. McCarthy? You need to trust me, I said evenly. Like hell I do! Did you trade my daughter? Quick as lightning, he grabbed me by my shirt. I tried to brandish the knife, but he struck my right arm at the elbow. The whole limb went numb and I dropped the knife. I didn't! He shook me. I couldn't break his grip. Titania looked very amused. She had been walking to the portal. Now she watched our unintentional drama. Dad? He let go of me and the two of us turned. Shannon had walked through the portal. She was holding Raj and Killian went to her side in an instant. Titania took a step backwards. How did she bring my baby through the portal? She asked. I looked at Shannon. I don't know, I said. I didn't give her any. I patted my pockets and my eyes widened. I remembered the sudden hug she gave me just moments ago. You stole the rest of my iron? That's right, I did, Shannon answered, hugging the baby to her chest. Something seemed wrong. And your intuition was right, Killian said. That's my daughter. No, it isn't, I said. I held up my hands. I never made a deal to give up Shannon. Titania just wants Raj. I'm sorry I didn't tell you because you knew that's ghoulish, Shannon snapped. I'm not giving a baby back to the people that kidnapped him. Titania had made her way back over to my mother. She was still asleep. She grabbed her by the hair. She pulled her head back, exposing the veins in her neck, and took out her knife. We had a deal. She was looking right into me. I couldn't move. She brandished the knife. It shocked me into motion. Titania, wait. This wasn't part of the contract. She had a haughty expression on her perfect fairy face. Wasn't it? If she's mine, I'm free to do with her as I please. And if I have no child, I don't see the point of keeping her around. I don't have a use for a mother. She smiled. Besides, it will upset you. Wait! She took the knife she had used to slash her palm and cut my mother's throat. She dropped her then, and added, Don't worry, I can heal her if you make good on our contract. Assuming there's enough time. Even I don't have a way to bring back the dead. Bring me the child. Blood had started to pool underneath my mother's neck, growing quickly like a rising tide. I turned on Killian and Shannon. My hands picked up the knife Killian had given me. Guys, I said, you don't understand. I need you to give me that baby. I truly did not know what I was planning to do. Whether I would have actually physically attacked them or not in my desperation. Shannon looked ready to continue to talk and berate me for what I had done, but Killian was too smart for that. He notched an arrow in his bow and fired. I tried to get out of the way and was amazed that I actually managed to do it. How could a hunter as competent as him miss at the distance I was to them? Then I realized he wasn't aiming for me at all. Titania screamed. She clutched at the arrow in her arm, ripping it out with her nails. Green and red lines spread out from the wound. The green dripped thicker than my mother's blood under her feet. "Shannon, go!" Killian exclaimed. "Out of the house!" Shannon froze for a moment, eyes splitting between Titania screaming, my mother, and me. I'm sorry," she finally said. "I'm not sure who to. But they forced me to take care of him, and they don't get to be mad that I won't let him go. Now!" Killian roared. Shannon ran. Even in the panic states I was in, I knew it would be no good trying to get past Killian to chase after her. "What is this?" Titania screamed. It had seemed at first that her scream was out of shock, but the initial pain of being hit had not dissipated. If anything, from the sizzling sound and the smell of burning flesh and blood, it was getting worse. The red and green veins had reached her shoulder. I had time to experiment while I was in that hellhole, Killian said. Figured out there were some plants you freaks didn't like. I poisoned the arrow tips with them. That's a mixture of St. John's wort and yarrow. She had curled up on the ground at this point. I do not think I ever saw a living creature look to be in so much pain. Killian put a hand on my shoulder as he stood next to me. By now, the blood was coming near my feet. My mother's blood. "Listen, I get why you did what you did," he whispered in my ear. "But I have to look out for my daughter. You understand?" He got another arrow ready. "Now heal her goddamn mother, or this next one is aimed somewhere more vital. You fairies like deals? A lung for a lung seems fair, doesn't it?" I clenched my jaw, sucking in the breath. Do what he says. "You morons," Titania hissed. "You've poisoned me. I can't use magic until the poison passes. Do you understand? Not even if I wanted to." There was groaning. First I thought it was my mother. I realized that it was Hawk, starting to stir from under Titania's sleeping spell. "Hawk!" I ran to him. He still was not awake. Shaking him did not work. I searched his pockets and found his flask. "Come on, wake up!" I tilted the black coffee against his lips, forcing him to swallow. With the final punch of caffeine, his eyes fluttered open. He coughed. "What the hell? Hawk, my mother, do something!" What the hell happened? "I'll explain later. Right now I need your help." As soon as he saw what was happening, Hawk went to my mother. He had a first aid kit with him. Titania had stopped weeping, resorting to just whimpering in pain on the ground nearby. She was covered in my mother's blood. I watched her twitch. Hawk had not even opened the kit before he looked at me. "Kid," he said, "I'm sorry." He was going to need healing immediately to survive an injury like this. I knelt down to her side. Mother's eyes were glassy. She was staring at the ceiling. I checked her pulse the way I had just seen Hawk do it, pressing desperately, like surely it had been a mistake and there was still something there. But there was not. Not even the barest vibration. My mother had no final goodbye for me. No final words. She had not even been awake when it happened. I suppose that was better than if she had been conscious. Killian turned his head toward me. "Hey, go," I said. I didn't move. My hand stayed pressed against my thighs as I stared down at my mother's lifeless body. Her blood covered me anywhere my hands touched. I tried to be as still as I could. But what about you two? We'll be fine, I interrupted. Go outside. CJ is waiting in the car. I didn't lock it. Start driving and get as far away as you can. The Paranormal Pinkertons will get in contact with you to make sure your family is protected. And to help forge adoption papers for your second baby. Whatever you want. I mean it. Get out. My voice cracked. I had not meant it to. Killian still looked unconvinced, but with Hawk there to be an adult, I suppose it was enough for him to finally decide he needed to worry about Shannon. Or maybe he knew there was nothing left to do. When he left, Hawk finally got to his feet. As much as I wish I could finish the job, killing their queen is how we risk all-out war between us and the fairy allied parts of the Outreterre, Hawk said. He walked toward Titania. You have no idea what you've done, she spat, still clutching her arm as she shook violently. Foam was covering her pouty lips. I won't let something like this just go. They still need to pay for what they've done to me, and Oh, shut up. He kicked the side of her jaw. She went out like a light. He squinted at the rift, and when he realized it was there, he hoisted Titania up and threw her out like trash down a chute. She's worse than Oberon, he remarked. No wonder he likes screwing with her. Now, Air, I've been doing a good job of keeping my composure so far, but now you better give me a good explanation as to what... He stopped. I was crying. I was clutching my mother's hand, and my shoulders were shaking, and I had started crying, and I could not stop. I kept crying until I could not breathe. I kept crying until I was sure I would pass out. And when Hawk finally chose to sit down next to me and awkwardly place a comforting hand on my back, at some point I did. I want to make several things perfectly clear. The fault in what happened was mine, and mine alone. I do not blame Shannon or Killian for their actions. Truthfully, were the rules reversed, I almost certainly would have done the same thing. It was the right thing. I was so blinded by wanting to help fix the mess I had stumbled into that I was willing to bargain with an innocent orphan baby's freedom. My inability to think dispassionately about the events cost a life, and likely would have caused others if not for Killian's actions. My first action as Control has been to dispatch agents to help them with damage control, and forging the proper documents. Never do I want to see them again, but I also cannot say that they were bad people. Hell, Killian was growing on me before the end. He would have made a great detective. Agent Hawk is not to be blamed either. He did the best that he could with the mess I had created for him. And if not for him, Liam and I would have died. The case files my mother was working on have been put in my possession. I have begun familiarizing myself with them, and I will begin taking over her duties immediately. I have no choice, after all. I am Control now. Regardless of all that has happened, the work of the Paranormal Pinkertons must continue. I can only hope that you would be able to trust me, in spite of these circumstances. This is Control, signing. Hello? Agent Morrow, yes. Hello. Speak up? I'm sorry, Jack, my mother can't come to the phone. No, it wasn't a rumor. I'm sorry. Yes, I am Control now. If you have any questions about a case, I can answer them. Just give me a moment, okay? God, I need a cigarette. Oh. We're done here.
Pinkerton's Ghosts is a podcast distributed by Superversive Radio Licensed under an Attribution Non-Commercial, Share-alike International License. This episode was written by Mariel Marchetta and performed by the same. Ben Wheeler edits, directs, produces, and herds cats. Kid Dickerson performs our audio editing. Visit us on Facebook, read articles on superversivesf.com, or listen to us on unauthorized Acast, iTunes, or Spotify. Contact us through Twitter at @PinkertonsGhost, email us at pinkertonsghosts@gmail.com, or send us noble messenger possums with messages strapped to their backs. Don't worry, they know how to find us. Thank you for listening, and good luck.